How's everybody doing? And let there be sound. How's everyone doing? Look at the person next to you. Say, how you doing? And if you don't know the person, say, you looking good today. Because y'all look good from here. Welcome to the People's Forum, y'all. How many of you have been to the space? Welcome back home. And if this is your first time at the People's Forum, make it your home. We are a political education space, a cultural space, where we aim to uplift and promote socialist values, principles, and knowledge. So if you haven't stopped by 1804, make sure you stop by 1804 and cop a book. So it's very exciting to be here. And as always, I forget to introduce myself. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Claudia de la Cruz, and I'm co-executive director of the People's Forum. I love y'all too. I want to appreciate just the TPF team that has worked so hard to put this event and other events together. And so shout out to the TPF staff. Woo! I'm highly excited to be in this conversation tonight with these two amazing comrades. And I want to say that again, comrades. They're not necessarily friends. They're not necessarily, partners in crime. They're partners in struggle. We move and work towards the same type of world, which is a socialist world, which is a communist world. And I'm very excited to be in conversation with both my comrades. Before I introduce them, I just want to share a little bit of context. Everybody knows that we're living in a moment of crisis at multiple levels. We don't have to. We are living in a moment of what is called hybrid wars, which is different tactics utilized to oppress, exploit, and extract, not only internationally, but also domestically. And when we talk about those things happening, the people who suffer the most are the historically marginalized, the people who have been historically oppressed and exploited, which happen to be Black, brown people, women, the elderly, those who are suffering many other type of conditions. And so the conversation that we want to have today is one that is divorced from a view that has been spread throughout our movements, which is that liberal way of understanding the world, that American exceptionalist way of understanding the world, and trying to challenge ourselves to see and view things from a perspective that is not new to us, that is part of a Black radical tradition, but that has a last name. I like last names, It's a Black radical communist tradition. It's not alone radical. The politics make it radical, not the identity. And so that's what makes me very, very excited about this conversation tonight, because we live in a world that tells us that identity goes before politics. And this book, this contribution that these sisters have shared with us, tells us, reminds us that there's a Black communist tradition that we need to look back to. And so thank you all for coming. Applaud yourselves, because you could have been doing anything today, but you're sitting with us here tonight. And so I want to introduce co-editors of this amazing book. There's a reason why I'm like this, so y'all can see it. Unfortunately, we don't have it today, but you have flyers on your chairs where you could pre-order the book. The book actually officially comes out October 4th, if I'm not mistaken. And so you could pre-order it and you can have it. I was fortunate enough to get it and read it twice. So I want to introduce Dr. Charisse Burden-Stelly, is Associate Professor of African American Studies at Wayne State University, AKA Dr. CBS, in case you didn't know. All right. So I also want to introduce, again, a comrade and friend, partner in struggle, Dr. Jodi Dean, who is Professor of Political Science at Hobart and William Smith Colleges, and she's an active member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Give her a big round of applause. And this is where I sit down and engage in conversation with my comrades. We're gonna have a moment for Q&A. There are folks that are connected online, And so we're also going to tend to their questions when the time comes. How y'all doing? Good? Y'all believe you look good? You believe the person next to you look good? All right, that's the energy I want. Right, Angie? Yeah. All right, y'all. So I want y'all, I mean, again, because we live in the context in which we're living, where there are many questions, a lot of answers that are unknown or are inaccessible to people, because a lot of our predecessors have answered some of those questions. But there's a lot of distortion. One of the things that came to mind when I read the book was, what were some of the questions that you two were grappling with and seeking to answer with putting this selection of writings together? And so I'm going to ask Charisse to engage first, and then you could do it, Jodi.
Okay, sure. So thank you all so much for being here this evening, and I'm so sorry we do not have books. We have sent a very terse email to Tim at Verso Books. You can send one too. Okay, so what were some of the questions that we're trying to engage? I have some little notes here because I forget things. So I think that the very first question that we were trying to think about and that we wanted to answer was, what did Black women contribute to the CPUSA and vice versa? Now, so this book is about Black women who are in and around the Communist Party USA. Obviously, we know there are other communist and socialist parties. This is the tradition that we're drawing on for this particular collection. And so this is important because there's this idea that communism or socialism is some white shit, right? It's for the Euros. And what that false narrative does is it erases or obscures the very important, very long, sort of longue durée work that Black people generally and Black women particularly did in the Communist Party. And this had to do with the types of organizing in which they engaged. It has to do with the type of theory they built, the types of principled struggle they waged within the party. So that was one question. And then the other side to that, though, is sometimes because of what we might call intellectual McCarthyism, what can happen is that when we do lift up Black women, we try to sanitize them or obscure their radicalism, their communism, their Marxism, or their socialism. And so what we're doing with this book is not arguing for a radicalism that Black women had despite the party, but because of the party. They joined the CPUSA or were fellow travelers of that party for a reason. And this is not to say that everything is reducible to the party, but they struggled in that party for a reason, right? And that's the first thing. The second thing is we wanted to answer sort of what were the key issues around which Black women were organizing. They were anti-imperialists. They were anti-capitalists, specifically communists, right? They were struggling against triple oppression, not intersectionality. This is not something that's rooted in identity. They were analyzing what their relationship to the capitalist mode of production was and what were the forms of oppression emanating therefrom. So they were looking at their experiences, and they were forming organizations, waging campaigns, writing pieces at the intersection of their oppression and exploitation, what we might call super exploitation. And so that's something else we wanted to answer in the book. And then the third question that I'll talk about is, what are the types of writing that can convey the range of these women's ideas and methods of organizing? So when you get the book, there are essays, there are party committee reports, there are position papers, and there are even a couple of fictionalized columns that Alice Childress wrote for Paul Robeson's Freedom magazine. Because having these different types of writing forces us to reconsider what counts as knowledge production and what is theory, right? Where is theory expressed? Where is it built? And where is it shared? And also theory for who, right? Because these women, the writing is clear, it is accessible. It's not basic, but it's simple, it's concise. And so Black women fundamentally understood this, right? That the ways that we build theory and the ways that we produce knowledge are not just in single author monographs. There are a whole host of ways that that this is conveyed. So I'll turn it over to Jodi now.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, Claudia. Thanks to the People's Forum and everyone for coming. So I'll first just start with a little bit of the practicality of how the book came together. I was teaching a seminar, and one of my students was looking for a text from Louise Thompson Patterson, and she said she couldn't find it. And I'm like, I was thinking, oh, I don't believe her. I bet she just didn't try. And so then I'm like, oh, I was thinking I can find this in 5 seconds, and then I can say, blah. Well, no, she'd done really hard work and couldn't find it, and I couldn't find it. And I was like, wait, what? So then I know Charisse has an amazing amount of archival material, so I assumed that she would have it. And then she didn't have it. And then she talked to different friends, because a lot of people actually helped contribute to this, helped give us text from different archives that they had visited, but nobody had this. And so at this point, it starts to become really clear, like there is a huge gap in the available literatures that has an impact. It affects on how people understand organizing, on how people understand Black history, communist history, feminist history. Like when these texts are not available, then you don't have a good sense of what the history was. And so at this point, we realized we really need to collect this all this material. And of course, there's not all. We couldn't. This is like a starting point for these primary texts. But like, let's bring it together so that people can have it, and it can be a lot easier. So the first thing is like, it became a really practical. It was meeting a practical need, both for academics and for organizers, to know our history and know what people are looking for. So that make it easier for people to find it. So that's the first part. So it's kind of an academic whole, and then the more we started reading through the different materials, the more it became clear, like, oh, there are really important lessons in this, in all of this for organizers. And for me, one of the most important of the lessons was the sense of patterns that all of the not all of them, but a number of the women point out, whether or not it's in a speech or in a text that they've written or in a memoir, but they look at the patterns of oppression and resistance. And so they'll anchor when they're looking at a particular instance, they'll connect it with things that had happened historically, both the oppression and the resistance to it. And then they'll look at it across the ocean, across the sea, and say, this is what's happening in other places, and they're fighting oppression, and that oppression is like what we encounter. So what was sort of inspiring once the material started coming together was seeing how they articulated local struggles with larger patterns, both historically and geographically.
Thank you. I think it's important. You talked about theory. For a long time, I've been doing organizing and I've been engaged in political work for a long time, over 20 years. And in that process, there's a lot of folks that talk about theory as if it was something that they were gonna catch, some sort of illness, right? And understanding that theory is a reflection of our organized struggle is important. It's not something that we leave only to academics to be able to define, but it is a reflection of what we do. It is the analysis. And being able to and I shared this with you, Jodi, when you came in, I was like, man, the first time I heard about the Bronx slave market, I was probably 24 years old, 25, it's 2005. 24, 25 years old. How is it that you learn American history and you don't learn about the Bronx slave market? I'm from the People's Republic of the South Bronx, just in case you didn't know. And how many of you actually know about the Bronx slave market? Oh, wow. We gotta, this book, we have to. And you don't read about it because there's an interest for you not to know about it. Because then you start making connections. There's a reason the Cross Bronx is there. You bypass the Bronx. You don't have to go to the poorest congressional district in the United States. You could just bypass it. And that was intentionally done. And so to learn that there were women organizing at the early part of the 20th century around these things, does something to your psyche, because it makes you understand that you're not crazy, that the conditions in which we live have been created intentionally for us to continue to be where we are today. And so I was wondering which of these writings spoke most to you. That writing spoke a whole lot to me. And then there were Claudia Jones' writings as well, Ella Baker. Like there's so much there. And the different approaches that were captured in the book were really well as well. There were the reports, there were the analysis. They were talking to the external, but they were also challenging the internal politics of their organization in a very comradely way, but in a very assertive way. And these are the demands that we have, and this is how we envision our political work to be. So which of these writings kind of spoke to you most in terms of, you know, your own development, your own political work? And I'll start with Jodi.
I hope you might will be okay if I read a little bit of the one that
you could read all. I mean, I
re-
wish we all had
that
the
I
book,
really
so we could
love.
open up pages and read together. That's my most favorite thing in the world.
So this is a piece from 1953 by Eslanda Good Robeson, and it's called "Unrest in Africa Due to Oppression," and it was published in Freedom magazine. The struggle of the African people in Kenya for the return of their land, the struggle of the African, Indian, and colored people in South Africa against segregation and discrimination, the struggle of the North African people in Tunisia and Morocco for control of their land, resources, and internal affairs, the struggle of the people of Indochina and Malaya for control of their natural wealth. All these are closely related to the struggle of the Negro people here in these United States for truly representative government and full equality. And these struggles are essentially another part of the successful struggle of the peoples of India and of Indonesia for self-government and independence. Their victories are our victories. And to go a little further back in history, the successful struggle of the Chinese people under the warlords and of the Russian people under the czars for control of their land, resources, and government were and are part of the whole picture, and their victories are also our victories. I love this so much, right? I mean, she's connecting the struggles, and so you can take inspiration from other victories and recognizing if these people can come up out of oppression, then everyone can come up out of oppression. And it just takes organizing and unity and staying together. And so I love this piece so much. I mean, I want to get it tattooed on my back. So it's just really, yeah. There are other ones, but that's my very favorite.
So, I chose sort of like 4 readings, one old, like a reading that I already knew about prior to doing this volume, one that I encountered as we were putting this volume together, one that confirmed my own orientation, and one that pushed me. So the first one, the piece that I love and that I was familiar with prior to doing this volume was Claudia Jones's On the Right to Self-Determination of the Negro People in the Black Belt, which is probably maybe her second most known piece. The first is probably An End to the Neglect of the Problem of the Negro Woman. But I really love this piece on the right to self-determination because I believe that the Black Belt Nation thesis was essentially correct. The third period is my favorite period for those of us who have favorite periods. And because of the types of work that the Black Belt Nation thesis facilitated. And so in that piece, this is also a really funny clapback piece, like, because she's really dragging Earl Browder, who, under his sort of leadership of the party, was when the party moved away from the Black Belt Nation thesis and the emphasis on Black self-determination. So it's a great piece for a number of reasons, but that is one of my favorites. In terms of a new piece, there's a piece by Thelma Dale called The Status of Negro Women in the USA, and she wrote this piece in 1947, so shortly after World War II. And that piece is important for me because this idea of triple oppression, there were the main pieces that I draw on when thinking about triple oppression are Louise Thompson Patterson's Toward a Brighter Dawn. There's a 1935 piece by Eugene Gordon and Cyril Briggs that's about Black women's double oppression, but it's really about triple oppression because they just take worker as a given. And then there's Claudia Jones's The End of Neglect of the Problems of the Negro Woman, and then also Esther Cooper Jackson's 1940 master's thesis. So this piece was another piece to add into that analysis of triple oppression, because she's talking about the way how Black women are being pushed out of industry, for example, after World War II, and the ways triple oppression manifests for them in this era of like demobilization and deindustrialization, which is actually really important. In terms of a piece that confirmed my politics, there's one by Dorothy Hunton called Where Are You Hiding? And so I'm working on a book right now about mutual comradeship, which is about the ways that radical Black people struggle at the intersection of sort of Black liberation and then state repression. And this piece is about her husband, Alpheus Hunton, was thrown into prison in 1955 because he refused to turn over the list of donors for the Civil Rights Congress, which was an organization that was adjacent to the Communist Party. And she's talking about how his incarceration affected her, how it affected the community. So that we have to understand that state repression is not just about the people who are exiled or deported or thrown in prison, but it has a fundamental effect on the families and on the, on the communities, there's a gendered effect, right? Because it's often the women who are left behind to take care of the family. So this is also like, we also have a piece in here from This Is My Husband by Esther Cooper Jackson, where she's talking about her husband, James Jackson, being forced underground. So anyway, so and I just love Dorothy Hunton anyway. Her beauty was renowned, so I'm kind of like obsessed with her. But yeah, everybody talked about how pretty she was. I was like, okay. Yeah, and that, so it's like, we need every tool in our toolkit, okay? And then a piece that pushed me on my own thinking was by Williana Burroughs, and it's called Negro Work Has Not Been Entirely Successful. And so that piece was really, it's so concrete, and I'm a academic. I'm a political theorist at that, and so I can be quite abstract in my thinking. And so pieces that concretize and spell out very sort of clearly what is to be done, I find to always push me to be like, okay, so what does this look like on the ground in real time? So there you go.
Thank you both. Another aspect of the book, the book is divided into different sections. The question of internationalism and the need for internationalism was something that came up rather much in the book. I think, it's important and I always think about it and say it, our need to be able to know the global context in many ways shapes our orientation of what to do here. Because we are living in the belly of the beast, because we are living, if not in one of the most violent and one of the most creators of violence throughout the world, it is important for us to have context and know what our comrades, what our friends, what our siblings are doing to resist imperialism where they are at. There's a lot of conversation and exchange that happens in that moment with the Soviet Union, going and learning from Europe in terms of how people are organizing and resisting fascism. So if you could speak more about the role of internationalism in the political organization of these women and how these women approached internationalism as a way of strengthening their organizing here, it would be amazing. So I'll start with Charisse, and then we'll go to Jodi.
So there's a few different ways that internationalism figures into this piece. So the first is like the way that they appealed to the international community for particular campaigns that they were waging in the United States. So for example, if you take the case of the Scottsboro 9, which was a 1931 case, basically these 9 boys, like young boys, were put on death row essentially for raping these 2 white women. And so it was a very long and drawn out case. There's a lot of important case law that came out of litigating the Scottsboro 9 case, one of which is like Powell v. Alabama, for example. But what the Communist Party did, particularly the International Labor Defense, is that they understood that it was important to wage a mass campaign, that it wasn't only important to fight in the courts, but you also have to wage a mass-based international campaign to be able to raise consciousness about and support for these 9 children who were being subjected to legal lynching. And this is the appeal to international solidarity and and making internationalist connections with different cases was a strategy and an approach that the Communist Party often used. So, for example, they will often write about the Scottsboro case alongside the invasion of Abyssinia in 1935 and how both were manifestations of different types of fascism. So that's one way. The second way is that they attended to the international situation. So most of the women that we write about are situated in the United States, but they were always analyzing what was going on throughout the world. For example, Lorraine Hansberry attended a peace conference in Paul Robeson's stead because his passport had been suspended in 1951, and she talks about the different way, like, so out of that experience, she talks about a revolution that's happening in Egypt at this time, right? This Egyptian revolt that's happening and how they are resisting imperialism. They're resisting, she doesn't use the term neocolonialism, but effectively they're resisting the imposition of neocolonialism, of which the Suez Canal is one manifestation. And that the way that the United States and the West is trying to delegitimize that struggle is by calling it a threat to world peace and by calling it communist, right? And so in that piece, she also shows the international sort of spread of anti-communism and how the U.S. used this as an internationalist tactic to be able to denigrate other types of struggles. And they also understood the importance of international solidarity, right? And solidarity rooted in action, not just sentiment. So sometimes that can get lost these days when we're like in solidarity with whoever, right? And it's just kind of like a retweet and that's the end of our solidarity, but they understood that international solidarity is rooted in material action. And so the last thing that I'll say is, so two more things. The second to last thing I'll say is that imperialism and capitalism are international systems, and they understood this, therefore one has to be internationalist. And the related point is that the imperialists and the capitalists are internationalists. They do not respect any borders. Borders mean nothing to them. So if they are internationalists, we absolutely need to be as well, right? And these women understood that.
Yeah. I guess I can add just a little, I live in the middle of nowhere, like way up in the Finger Lakes in Geneva, New York. And so it's sometimes hard to feel like the organizing you're doing there has global significance. But actually reading these women makes me feel that way. I mean, it makes me feel like for them, it's almost like there's no such thing as a local struggle. Like every struggle is part of a global struggle. And it's not just like think globally, like that kind of crap. No. It's much more profound because they see the patterns. They recognize that building things locally is actually how you are going to make a massive mass movement be possible. So I feel like it makes me able to see my own struggles differently up in the middle of nowhere. The other thing is really profound, I think, is how particularly after World War II, they're really interested in building a global peace movement. And there's a number of writings about the peace movement, the anti-nuclear movement, the anti-bomb movement, and here. These are a few speeches from Claudia Jones emphasize this, as she's making these, building the peace movement and talking about, and this women's peace group in this town, and this women's peace group in this country, and these women over here, right? She keeps pulling them together and letting everyone start to recognize, there really is an international peace movement that's meaningful and that's powerful, and that in fact, the capitalists and imperialists are also now starting actively to try to shut down. So that's happening. So I think, that's what I would emphasize.
See, that's what you do when you're really invested in listening to these two. I think it's important to raise, and I want to make the emphasis that this book is a contribution, I think, beyond an academic contribution. Is a contribution to organizers. Really, is a contribution to people who are seeking to be part of organized struggle. The title says it, organize, fight, win. That's the urgent call. the question is, how do we do it effectively? Because we've been trying to do it, but we haven't won yet. We have accumulated victories. We have gained some bourgeois reforms that, by the way, are being rolled back and chopped by the Democratic Party. I'm just putting that out there. So we know we can't depend on the bourgeoisie that create the conditions to solve our problems. So if we're organizing and we're fighting and we're doing this to win, how do we do it? And so we need to look back and see what are the lessons from the past for both things that we're not able to advance and things that we're able to advance. So we are able to creatively create our path and win, because we struggle to win. And do people want to struggle for the rest of their lives? For real though? No, right? We are in struggle and we are fighting to win. So having the ability to go back and learn from the lessons of these Black radical communist women is a way of doing that, is a way of accumulating those lessons, analyzing those lessons, contextualizing, and then moving forward. So I'm wondering, what are some of the lessons that we could get from reading this book, from reading these women, because that's what we're doing. Charisse.
So, I mean, we're all, so I'm in an organization called Black Alliance for Peace. Me and my comrades in this organization and the people who write for Hood Communists, et cetera, like, we're always emphasizing join an organization. Join an organization. You have to join an organization, a party, whatever. You have to be part of some type of collective entity. And if you take anything away from the book, it's that every single one of these women was in an organization. They were in a party, and they waged principal struggles within that entity, organization or party. They waged struggle within it, not to center themselves or to put their individual grievance above the party, but to hold the party or the organization to a standard at which it should be, and to make that party or organization better. There's a lot of pushback these days about joining an organization because of contradictions that will inevitably arise in any organization, because we are still in a capitalist, imperialist, patriarchal, white supremacist world. There are always going to be those contradictions, but what these women convey is that you wage principal struggle within your organization to eradicate as much as you can those contradictions, right? And I think that is extremely, extremely important. There is no way to build a mass movement without organizations. It's not gonna happen. So related to that, and I just mentioned, is like principle critique, right? And then part of being in organizations is like your position doesn't always win. Your line doesn't always win. And so you don't destroy or attack the organization or the party because your line doesn't win. You continue to debate, right? You continue to sort of try to gain, implement sort of your ideas, but that's what like discipline is about. You don't, like, liberal individualism is antithetical to discipline, and these women had discipline, which is why so many of them were like long distance revolutionaries, decades long revolutionaries. And then, the other lesson is that, like, we have to constantly, Claudia spoke to this a bit, but like, we have to always evaluate like how we will win. We have to believe that we will win, right? Fidel Castro says like revolutionaries are always optimistic. We have to believe that we'll win. And so like the nihilism, the fatigue, the frustration that can come from the sheer daunting task of Black liberation and socialism, it can be overwhelming, but like we will win. Like we have to believe that. Like you have to keep that like top of mind always. And to me, I feel like These women fundamentally believe that. Otherwise, why would they be continuing to struggle over decades in the face of McCarthyism, in the face of the Red Scare, you know, in the face of the anti-peace repression, in the face of, you know, feeling marginalized at times within their parties or organizations? Why is it that they kept on going? Well, because they knew, right, that we would win. So,
Thank you.
Sometimes it seems like organizing for them is like they want to have more and more organizations, and they use building organizations as really good tactics. So if most of them are in and around the party, and then if there's going to be a new campaign, they will form another organization to fight that campaign, and then another organization to meet to interact with yet other organizations. And so what's sort of great is like there's always more and more organizing that they're doing. It's never like, I'm gonna go out on my own. It's never, let's just spontaneously let something happen. It's always like, oh, we have to do something, we need another organization. You know, some people used to criticize communists for having front groups. That seems a stupid criticism, right? It's like, oh, you mean having organizations that are trying to bring people together in order to fight against oppression? Like, come on, like that's all a front group is. And here you see them as really active, vibrant, important parts of organizing, right? Creating, new sets of organizing through which the party work can be done even better. So I like that a lot in what they do. I also like seeing how they use writing as an organizing tool, right? Whether or not it's creating different magazines and journals. We have a lot of pieces all from the Freedom magazine that was founded by Paul Robeson and Louis Burnham. So that was an important thing for them, is creating basically creating the intellectual means to disseminate their messages. That matters. And they criticize their comrades. I gotta say, typically, usually it's men who are getting criticized for not asking Black women to dance. There's several of these criticisms. It's like, look, we all say that we need to organize Black women. We think this is absolutely crucial to the working class struggle in the United States. This is a major part of the workforce. Like, we have to do this. So, but you don't do this just by saying, okay, come to a party meeting. You fully change your whole social life. Right, you fully bring people in. And then doesn't mean you just invite people there and stand around with your own groups. It's like, no, you have to fully change every aspect of social life so that everybody comes in. So that means you gotta dance with everybody. And so there's several of these, like that like
even if you ain't got no rhythm, just try, Ted.
I think one of the things that I appreciated a lot was also, how do we organize and how do we reach the masses? How do we do this? And these women reflected on that on their writings. Do we utilize culture and cultural events? Do we utilize political education as one of our primary vehicles to be able to organize and bring people into these organized spaces? Those things are important. Are we gonna go out and be in that corner in the Bronx slave market and speak to people and actually get what their experiences is? And so being and connected to struggle, sometimes we talk about struggle and we, in a very abstract way, theorize about struggle, but are not connected to the masses that are in struggle, that have yet to found the language to articulate their struggle. You get what I'm saying? And so how do we connect to how people are struggling and how people are organically also organizing? Because our people have survived. That means that there's a certain level of organization, even if it's not politicized, that our people have. And these women were reflecting on those things. And so I think, there are many lessons to be captured. I think, I can't wait for the second volume. I'm just saying, just putting it out there in the world. It's not like they're here and they could do it. I'm just putting it out.
We're not doing it.
But we want to open the floor and get questions, comments that you all may have. Please do take the flyers with you when it's time for us to leave. Pre-order your book, create study groups with it, engage with these women who are not only of our past, they are women of our forever. These women are are forever our teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to be continuing to engage with their writings. And so do you have
I just want to add two things. One is I just want to point out the collective nature of this volume in general, right? So like not only are me and Jodi sorry. I'm bad with the mic. I usually have like the lapel thing. Anyways, not only like are we co-editors and we like collectively kind of conceptualize and put this thing together, but Jodi's daughter Sadie typed all of the things up because we had like microfiche and random archival documents. Her daughter typed it up, so shout out to Sadie. We had our friend, graduate student Adam O'Neill. He did the work to get the permissions because you have to have permissions when you're using these different documents. We got a lot of this stuff from like some of our like intellectual friends. They sent us what documents they had. So we would look in the footnotes of some important books like Sojourning for Freedom or In the Cause of Freedom or Radicalism at the Crossroads. And so a lot of people sent their documents, right? We have our editor, Rosie, who did work. We have Tim been doing the marketing stuff. He didn't send the book, so I'm like, he's on my shit list right now.
He's gonna send the book.
They were supposed to be here though, so shame on Tim. But anyway, anywho, Tim is doing his job too. So I definitely want to point that out. The second thing is that you were speaking about the Bronx slave market, and I just want to return to the Bronx slave market. Here's what's important about, there's many, many important things, but like a lesson for people like me to take away, and probably other people, other sort of students who are gonna go into academia, is the importance of class suicide. Like this book is about and for workers, but like petty bourgeois people are workers too, whether or not you see yourself as such, you are. And also like for the Bronx slave market, for example, Marvell Cooke came from a middle class, affluent family in Minnesota. But for the Bronx slave market, this was investigative journalism. So she actually worked she participated in the Bronx slave market, not only in 1935 when that piece was written, but again in 1950. So she literally did that work. She was not above the work. And doing that allowed her to connect investigative journalism or journalism in general with organizing. And so for people who are from affluent backgrounds or who are in, whatever the professions or are part of the buffer class, it's still your responsibility to do work too. And that you have to actively work against the bourgeois sort of nature of our society. But you don't just get to sit back like, well, I'm not a worker, so, or you don't just get to dictate to the people. Like you have to be part of the struggle, right? And so Amilcar Cabral writes a lot about class suicide, but that's our responsibility is to, if we're in academia, for example, to do stuff like this, to democratize that knowledge, to democratize resources. So if there's, for the students who are here who are gonna go on to hope maybe get a job, I don't know, academia going pear-shaped fast, but to the extent that you do that, like you can't be entrapped in the ebony tower. Like you have to do work for people, the people, right? So
I wanted to just talk a little bit about the some of the organizing and slash pedagogical aspects, because we so it's 99% nonfiction, sort of speeches and memoirs and analyses and party documents. And then we've got two articles that were published in Freedom Magazine by Alice Childress. Charisse mentioned them earlier, and these are written from the perspective of Mildred, who is a domestic house worker. And we have these in there because in some, the pieces, I think, teach really well and let people recognize different ways of having conversations about organizing, about being workers. And so I want to just read one paragraph of this, because this is to me one of the reasons that I really liked this piece, because there were a whole bunch and we couldn't have a whole bunch of them. We had to delete a lot of stuff. Okay, so it's all about hands, and the section is called What the Hands Do. This tablecloth began in some cotton field. tended in the burning sun, cleaned and baled, spun and bleached, dyed and woven. Find the story, Marge, behind the lettuce and tomato sandwich, your pots and pans, the linoleum on the floor, your dishes, the bottle of nail polish, your stove, the electric light, books, cigarettes, boxes, the floor we're standing on, this brick building, the concrete sidewalks, the airplanes overhead, automobiles, the miles of pipe running under the ground, that mirror on the wall, your clock, the canned goods on your shelf, and the shelf itself. Why, you could just go on through all the rest of eternity singing the praises of labor. And this, I think that this modeling of letting everyone see the work that goes into every aspect of our lives, everything around us, is something that we can use really easily for initial kind of outreach conversations with people. And we can turn that into different kind of exercises to let the visibility of labor be more and more present. And so there's some of these kinds of writing that I think might reach people in ways that are different from sort of some of the more analytical pieces. So I hope that folks, will enjoy these parts of the book as well.
Thank you both. So we're gonna go into the Q&A, and we're gonna take 2 comments or questions at a time. Who's the mic runner? Saidi. Everybody say hi, Saidi. Comments?
Don't be shy.
Hello?
Thank you, Ashley. This is going to be a little long-winded, I think, because I don't think I've fully thought it all the way through. But first of all, thank you for the book, the collection. I think it's going to be awesome to engage with and have this collection of text to reference for actual Black women, communist, radical, just a text. I think it's going to be amazing to read. So thank you for putting it together. What do you have to say for? Because I think I used to be of the mindset of leave the theory for the academics, because it gets very analytical, very theory-based. And I think I've definitely moved out of it as someone who engages a lot with political education and organizing. But do you see, or something that I see a lot in, particularly maybe more so in the white spaces, but the need to be so theory-based and theory-versed can sometimes lead you down this path of, you just see so many political lines being drawn, the need and their emphasis to identify as Marxist, Leninist, Maoist. I'm not sure if that makes complete sense what I'm saying, but you find yourself just, and especially in white spaces, I think you see more arguments about history and the theory more than that connection to action that you were talking about. So I guess just what are your thoughts on that, and how do you kind of navigate the being so connected to theory but also so connected to action, that you're not lost in theory?
There's a difference between theory and dogma.
Okay.
To me, dogma are the people who sit there and debate the merits of page 234 in Grandrisa. What did Marx mean? I don't give a fuck about that. Okay, so that just is completely immaterial. I will say, as an academic, it's fun. Right? It's fun it's intellectually stimulating, right? But that is not the work, right? There's a difference between being a scholar of Marx or a scholar of Lenin and a Marxist or a Leninist, right? And I feel the latter has to do with what are you doing? Theory is important though, because theory is how you understand everything. So for example, the right wing is against Biden. Communists are against Biden. Theory is the why. It's the so what. It's how we analyze our contextual, historical, and material conditions, the meaning we ascribe to that, and then the so what. That is to say, okay, well, what is to be done? That's theory, right? And so everybody needs it. And it's not to be able to memorize every single terminology. It's not to be able to describe as clear, eruditely, like what is dialectical materialism? It's not that. It's to understand that when we engage the world through dialectical materialism, we understand how history and how struggle unfolds in a particular way, right? And so to me, the people who get so mired down in dogma, they're not doing anything. They think that mastering the language is the work. No, the work is the work. Theory is, but work without theory is just movement, right? You have to have both.
I think a lot of the times, I think you're right. It happens a lot in white spaces. If people start to use theory as a way to exclude and to bludgeon and to show off and to hold themselves up, and that gives theory a really bad name. But like early on, like in tonight, Charisse was talking about the theory of triple oppression and that it's not the same thing as intersectionality. Right, and that discussion actually is important for our organizing, important for how we understand the way that struggles work together, how we build unity, how we build a larger and larger movement, how we have a movement that's designed to be strong and encompassing rather than one that is designed to divide and separate and distinguish. And so I think that it's got to be the case that folks who feel comfortable with theory learn how to be quiet, learn not to throw it, learn not to use it as a weapon against comrades, and know how to channel it against the people who are our enemies.
And in relationship to theory, there's Lenin said, I like Lenin a whole lot. You know what I'm saying? That's my man. So Lenin would say that there can't be a revolutionary movement without revolutionary theory. Like I said before, let's call things by their names. There's a theory that is for the bourgeoisie, that works for the bourgeoisie. But there's revolutionary theory that works to advance our movements. And we need to know the difference. And we need to read them both, actually, to be able to know the difference. And it's important for us to know the why, right? Like, why engage in it? And for the benefit of whom? Because we also could become type of people that accumulate the knowledge, and then we know how to quote a whole lot, and we know how to use the language, and not necessarily do the work, and weaponize the language to be able to create a distinction between ourselves and the people that are in struggle. And then we want to impose that language on people. And so revolutionary theory is important for us to be able to understand why, but also in the benefit of whom. Why are we doing this? And so, another aspect that I feel is important is the question of Eurocentrism. Is Marxism only for those who are looking at things from Eurocentric perspective? Let's ask Amílcar Cabral. Let's ask Fidel. Let's ask the Black and brown revolutionaries who engage with Marxism and learn to contextualize these things, these theories, into their own practice. Because it's a science. It's a science. It's not a dogma. It's a science. And we need to learn how to contextualize it. Those folks who make it a dogma are making it inaccessible for the rest of us. And so knowing the difference is really important. But thank you for that question. Don't be scared. Oh, there you go. Kate, in the meantime, can you check if there's anybody in the Zoom that's on? All right, thanks.
Doctor, you had mentioned the need to join organizations, right? And so much of the Black-led movement today being led by nonprofit organizations and gatekeepers and celebrity activists, celebrity organizations position themselves as the rightful heirs of that Black liberation movement and thus that current iteration of that movement. What organizations, not name, but what types of organizations are you talking about that we should be joining within that context? And the second one, if you can explain, was around the class suicide. What does that look like today? What does that look like for us who live in cities in the United States, right? Understanding like Cabral and those folks was like, go out to the countryside and work with folks. What does that look like for us in a city today, right? This notion of class suicide.
Okay, so to the first question, I think so. Yeah, so I should have been more precise. Join revolutionary or join radical revolutionary organizations that, again, have a particular theoretical perspective or ideological perspective that is geared toward one, the masses, and two, a fundamental transformation of this society and of the world writ large, to the end of where there's just no better way to say it. It's like, you know, to each according to their need, from each according to their ability, right? That's just foundational. That means that everybody will have stuff, right? Not just this very tiny minority will have everything, and then the rest of the people have almost nothing, right? That's not the world that we're engaging in. And so there are organizations that think that the way that the world is organized now is basically okay. It's called a but-for logic, that the US will be the greatest country in the world but for racism. And so if the ruling class reflects the population of society, then that's okay. So as long as there's 13% African American, whatever, 14% Latinx, however many whites in the ruling class, then that actually is justice. Those are not the organizations we're talking about, because those organizations simply want more chips in the cookie, right? They want things to remain as they are. They just want more racialized people being able to oppress and rob and exploit you. The organizations that we need to join are the organizations that are struggling now to build what's to come. And so again, I'm in the organization Black Alliance for Peace. There's a whole bunch of other organizations, and we have to look at where money is coming from. There's always gonna be NGO money floating around, like Mellon money, Ford money, all that stuff floating around. And there's ways to strategically employ that, but organizations that are wholly funded by your enemies are gonna be enemy organizations ultimately, even if they start out with particular types of approaches. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I gotta say about that. In terms of class suicide, I think so much of it is just about consciousness, right? So for example, if you're an academic, such as myself, like how I think about class suicide is, who am I in solidarity with? Am I in solidarity with contingent faculty and staff and graduate students when they're organizing? Am I calling out the fact that the academia is textbook labor aristocracy? It just is. Like, there's a tiny, tiny percentage of people in academia who are on tenure track. Everybody else is not. Everybody else is even more highly exploited. So it's having that particular type of consciousness. I think it is being mindful about what you're doing, like with your money, like what are you supporting? You know, I think it has to do with being rooted in communities. You know, it has to do with what are the type. If you're the voting type, what are you voting for? Are you voting for more police? Are you voting for people who advocate more police and policing? Or are you voting for things that are, that directly impact the community? I don't know. Voting people, you probably know more about this than me. I'm not a voting people, so I don't know. But so that's what I mean by class suicide. I think it's an active engagement in taking on ethics and values and consciousness and engaging in practices that aren't geared towards reproducing your status and your class. It's about always thinking about what is the betterment for the masses. And that means a lot of unlearning, because so much of our culture is like bourgeois culture, and it's meant for class reproduction. So, Jodi, I don't know if you wanted to add.
I wanted to add something on that along those lines. I think, political line and political program. Those are the two things that make up an organization. What do we believe and what do we do? And in a lot of ways, when you're talking about NGOs or nonprofits, what they do is not coherent with what they say they believe in. Because nonprofits are inherently against revolution. It doesn't matter what type of nonprofit it is. And unfortunately, a lot of our young people find employment in those spaces because they want to make a transformation. And there's a vacuum that has been intentionally created in our neighborhood so that there aren't any political organizations that have a political program and have a political line, right? And so that history is also there. So what does the organization do and what do they say they believe in is important. And what are the contradictions that live in that organization is also important. And are they aligned with my politics? That's also important. No organization is going to be perfect because we're not perfect people. And because we've lived under capitalism, imperialism, and patriarchy enough to be able to carry it within ourselves. So we're going to bring that into the space. But the politic is what's going to orient us to be able to deal with that contradiction. And if the politic isn't there, that organization will be dismantled easily, it will implode, or it will explode, because there's not a grounding on the politics, right? And so I think it's important to understand that the nonprofits, they serve a purpose, because it's not like they're useless. They serve a purpose, and there's different levels of nonprofits. There are corporate nonprofits, and there are service-based nonprofits. You can't tell poor people in the Bronx that those service-based organizations aren't doing anything for them, because they are. They are, and they're actually doing something that as political organizations or grassroots organizations, we don't have the infrastructure to do for them. So how do we do political interventions, and how do we create organizations that have a political line and create political programs that not necessarily shame people for going to a community service-based organization, but provide what that organization is missing? An orientation and an understanding of why you're going there in the first place, which was what the Black Panther Party was doing at some point, and then the state took, and then the state was doing it. And there was no reason or purpose for people to go to the breakfast program anymore. And well, they were getting some sort of consciousness as to why people weren't being fed in schools. And so that understanding needs to be made. How do we understand political organizations? And I'm put this in quotations because there are a lot of organizations that claim to be political, is what politics drive you? And then what programs are you engaged in? And who are the people that make up the organization? That's also important. What's the nature? What's the character? Is it poor people? Is it upper middle class people speaking about poor people? Is it, all those things matter. Questions, comments?
Hello, good evening. Thank you for coming out here and doing this book talk. I must confess I was late. I have an injured foot, so it took me a while to get here. So I'm not sure if you spoke about this, but I work with a small group of young people, and I've been trying to think about, their political education, popular education, and I wanted to know if you've thought about how to use your book to engage young people and thinking about, and the people I work with are coming from working class families and Brooklyn mostly. But yeah, straightforward question. I just wanted to think about how to use this book to work with the young folks.
There are a lot of different kinds of text in here that make it approachable for different kinds of groups. There's a set of paragraph-long articles written by Williana Burroughs, and it was published in the Negro Liberator, which was one of the CP's newspapers in the 30s. And one of them is about the bad quality of food available in Harlem, and how the different women in their households were complaining about the quality of the vegetables and fruit available nearby in their neighborhoods. And so the idea is that they're going to start to set up a kind of almost like a neighborhood watch to report on this place has not very good food, and they're going to pull information about where the good food is, where the bad food is. One of the things that's I think exciting about this little short piece is it immediately lets people draw comparisons to food deserts. It immediately has an idea of how to address the problem in a way that builds organizing, and it's short enough that it could be read aloud or it could be read in small groups in a meeting that would take like 20 or 30 minutes. So you could have 20 or 30 minutes of political education just around this one small piece in a way that opens up to lots of different things. So that would be one example. And there's lots and lots of different pieces in the book that that can be used like that. And then some are longer for larger study, but in terms of starting with younger people or starting in a setting where folks aren't yet accustomed to longer form study would be perfect.
Yeah, I think just being clear about I think something that I am working through or thinking about a lot is the difference between PE and political education and a reading group or a book club. So for political education, I think it is best served when there are like campaigns or programs or actions in mind. And then the political education helps to give the sort of why and the so what and the sort of the more broad political history of a particular issue. So I think that coming up with picking a reading or two and coming up with some discussion questions, thinking about how it applies to today. So Jodi gave a great example, connecting sort of bad food back then to food deserts now. And then thinking about, okay, so what are some action items that can come out of these readings? I think that that's really important for political education. So it's not, so that it has a sort of, there's something concrete about it, right? And I do think that like the round robin reading and that collective aspect of the study, so actually reading it in the group, right? Some people will have read it before, but not expecting people to have necessarily read it before, but reading it together, pulling out vocabulary that people might like that need to be explained, because we all don't know what imperialism is. We all don't know what capitalism is. People might not even know food desert, right? So like pulling out some of the key terms that people might need to understand. So doing that kind of like, I think granular work is really important to political education. Because to me, the ultimate point of political education is like consciousness raising, right? And to have a common vocabulary, not again so people can go on the street corner and be reciting like Williana Burroughs, but so we can all know what we're talking about, so we can all know what we're doing, right?
No. I think people should be out on the street corner, like talking. Here's what Claudia Jones says, and so now we better do this. Like it could be worse.
Y'all are funny.
And a quick question to add to about adding and teaching to youth. How do you battle all the anti-communist sentiment in K-12 curriculum? How do you put it in a way that you're not completely taking away all of the true history, but still teaching it in a way that is like telling youth what is actually happened? You don't want to like completely de-radicalize the history when putting into curriculum. So kind of question about how do you tackle that?
I ain't got no kids, so I don't really know. I don't know much about the K through 12s, but I will say like we need like this. I wouldn't say that this is a book that needs to be taught in a K through 12. I just don't trust those people with this. We need to create our own like, Marinage space. And there's some amazing K through 12 teachers that actually will do the book justice, right? But I think that we can create Saturday schools, or alternative spaces for this type of study. That's what I'm thinking, like youth groups who are outside of the classroom, right? Because we don't have to have those goofy ass battles in our own spaces. We just don't. Like we don't have to, is this, and the good thing about communism is that, it's not critical race theory. So, it's not at all. So, maybe you can throw it on a book list. I don't know. But I think that more critical at this juncture is creating our own independent kind of like, marinage spaces to be able to do that type of work with our youth, which is, which is like political education, but also undoing the miseducation as well.
Yeah, I would like to feel like there are some, particularly high school teachers, who could use some of the text from this. Let's say, for example, if they're teaching a unit, I guess teachers in high school do units, a unit on World War II. And with World War II, they wanted to talk about, so how were Americans, U.S. Americans mobilized to support the war? And then they can use this speech from Esther Cooper Jackson, who is talking to the Southern Negro Youth Conference and using support for the war as an opportunity to get a lot better jobs for young Black people, to bring in more industry to the South, to hold the U.S. up to its own standards if it says it's claiming it's fighting for democracy. And so it can be, oh, we were talking U.S. is fighting for democracy. Okay, what was happening in the United States? And she is, it seems like she's like completely patriotic, but the way she keeps saying it, and what does that mean in the South? And what does that mean for our Black people in the South? And how can the United States actually be the country it says that it is, given what's going on in the South? So I think a number of the pieces can work in that direction. So they could be used for high school teachers, and then they could do either with some of the shorter text or excerpts from some of these. And they can teach a curriculum that's actually opening back up to basically to real history, like what was really going on.
Thank you. I thought that there was someone back there. Oh, and someone in the front too.
Hi. Wait, I'll give it to you after. Okay, so mine's half comment, half question. The comment is back to the organization question. I think what distinguishes a revolutionary organization from any other types of organization is that they are democratic centralist in structure, and they also practice a regular criticism, self-criticism in their spaces. Now, if it's not democratic centralist, it can't actually be from the masses to the masses. If you're not doing weekly criticism, self-criticism, you can't actually evolve as a human being, right? So find organizations that have those two things, and if they don't have it but want to be revolutionary, make sure they implement that. Now, the question is, ever since we started, my organization went through that restructuring process, I started seeing democratic centralism and CSC in so many different revolutionaries' writings in a way that I didn't before. And I would love to know if you saw any of that through the making of this book.
Yeah, so, well, most of them are in the Communist Party in the 30s and 40s. And so they are, when they're like I'm thinking primarily of some pieces from Claudia Jones where she's criticizing the leadership for its abandonment of the Black Belt thesis, and really, saying the problems with abandoning that view and why it was a mistake. So it's still published in a party publication, which means she's also under party discipline and is, she's not trashing the party externally to it. So she's acting within a democratic centralist structure and also raising the criticisms. And that's not the only piece, that's just one of the clearest ones, where it's very clear that the goal is, how do we have a strong party? And the strong party needs to have the Black Belt thesis. It will be a weaker party if it does not have a strong commitment to Black self-determination. So I think it fits your bill.
I do not have anything to add.
Yes to democratic centralism. We could talk about that later.
Hi, CPUSA member here. I loved what you were talking about at the beginning, where these Black women were not just Marxists, but were Leninists and communists as well. And in young people of my age cohort, who did not experience the Soviet Union, who did not have an experience of, hiding under their school desks at school with the threat of nuclear war, talking to them, so many of them have that, union consciousness of, getting higher wages, better employment, all of these things. But then when you bring up issues of democratic centralism or of, the C word, or talking about Lenin or Mao or Fidel or any of these people, they have this sort of ingrained bourgeois reaction to it. And so if these women were here right now to be able to give me some advice and talking to young people who have this sort of natural ingrained reaction to those words, what do you think that they would say to me? Do you think that they would, be saying, go ahead, like just jump right in, give it to them straight? Or do you think that there's ways of, getting people into these conversations gradually and slowly? What do you think they would say?
So I'll just answer what I think. I'm not going to try to ventriloquize.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I think as an initial conversation, if you're talking to someone, you can make a parallel with, like, okay, if you're with a bunch of people and you all want to go to dinner, and you're saying, okay, where are we going to go? If everyone just wants to go get the only kind of food that they want, you're not going to go to dinner together. But if your goal is going to dinner, then some people are going to have to agree, okay, so tonight we get pizza or whatever it is. So but if you all go your separate ways, then you're not going to have dinner together. So democratic centralism is sort of like that. It's like you agree, like we all want to do something together, and that means that we have to keep doing it together. Like we can't just go on our own separate ways. And so we go, like, democratic centralism means that there's a period of democratic discussion, and then everybody toes the line after that period of discussion is over. And if folks don't want to do that, then they wouldn't be part of your organization, right? They don't agree enough to be part of it. I mean, it's like if they want to disagree, they can just go online. Right? Like that's not part of being in the organization. But I think it doesn't have to be this big, scary Leninist thing. I think it's a pragmatic, like, if we want to win, we have to work together, we have to cooperate, and that means that we accept the decision of a majority. I mean, it's pretty simple.
Well, so you can disagree, right? But you can't disrupt when you don't get your way. So we don't want to give this perception that it's like, it's not, you can disagree. Like, you're a human being. You have ideas that conflict. And in fact, those disagreements, that's why there's open debate. That's why there's open discussion. But the disagreement doesn't rise to the level of trying to collapse an organization because you don't get your way. That's not it. And the thing about so Jodi has written about comradeship. The thing about being comrades as opposed to friends or some other formation is that you trust your comrades enough that when you don't get your way, you still know they have your best interests in mind. And you're still moving toward the same political end, period. In terms of, so I would say, I answer the question, or, slightly differently, is like, just read what's in here. They're not starting out with, I am a Black woman communist, and this is why it's not identity. This is why it's politics. This is why it's what is to be done. If you read this stuff, the word communism doesn't appear a whole lot. And if the people agree with this, then they're agreeing with communism, right? And part of the reason, so Jodi talked about so-called communist fronts earlier, part of the point of creating organizations like the National Negro Congress or the Civil Rights Congress or the National Negro Labor Council or the Sojourners for Truth and Justice is because these organizations are to draw in different types of people, right? So you need to have, there's a way to have a common end without necessarily starting with the hard line. Because the line is what it is. It's the work. It's the work, right? And so we don't have to always go and dump our purse out and, be like, we're communists and Stalin or whatever it is that we say. Just do the work and it's gonna come out and people are gonna rock with it or not. More likely than not, they're gonna agree with the work that you're doing, and that's what draws them in. The problem, the way that liberal individualism has creeped into even our radical organizations is that people think they need to state everything outright. That's called dry snitching. You don't do that all the time. On the one hand, it's not that you need to hide it because we're not, it's because you're ashamed. But on the other hand, if you understand the correlation of forces and that we're in a deeply anti-communist society, you keep that in mind in your approach, right? And so you don't have to start, playing the internationalist anthem and then, whatever. Just do the work, and then the political education and the theory is what flows from that in my perspective. So
I want everyone to join me in thanking our comrades, Charisse and Jodi. I really do hope that you do the QR code situation and pre-order your book. There are writings from Grace P. Campbell, from Claudia Jones, from Ella Baker, from Charlotta Bass, Williana Burroughs, Thyra Edwards, and many, many more. And like I mentioned before, these are not women of the past. These are women who are speaking to us through history, from a very clear political orientation as Black, communist, revolutionary women. It is highly important for us to know that in our organizing, we start with the material conditions of our people. That is what tells us what we need to do, and we need to be highly connected to what those material conditions are. I want to thank you both for gifting us this, which is a really true and strong pedagogical, political, organizational tool. What we do with it is on us, and we are responsible for utilizing it in the best ways to be able to advance working class struggles, not only here in the United States, but also internationally. It is a book about revolutionary optimism, but also clarity in political analysis and how analysis can be articulated and how we could learn from these women to organize today. And so thank you both very much. And I hope you read it more than once. And I'll say it again, I hope that, part 2 comes soon. I know y'all are on some other stuff, you know what I'm saying? But part 2 is necessary. Thank you both. And thank you everyone for coming. I hope you stick around and speak with each other. Thank you all.